All right, so we're going to look at some more of Chapter 1 here. We probably won't get quite to the end, but most of the way to the end, because Chapter 2 is kind of short, and we can cover a little bit of it there. So let's just get to it. So here, we left off at security governance principles. So the governance is the practices that organize the security efforts of an organization so you can continue to run your business and limit the risk. And sometimes the rules of security are imposed on you from outside. If you are a regulated industry, there may be government regulations or general practices in your industry or requirements, license requirements for the software you're using. One thing that is rare, unfortunately, is having to improve your security to get your cybersecurity insurance. Cloudflare is talking about starting such a setup, but it hasn't happened yet. So you have to assess your security results and verify it. And security applies to more than IT, of course, like physical security and other things. So you want to align your security functions with the general objectives and strategy of the company, and try to have a business case to justify the expense of security, which is kind of hard because security doesn't actually have any direct return. It doesn't mean you're going to sell more product or anything. So it is often a little bit difficult to justify to the MBA types why they should expend money on security. So the Chief Security Officer, if you have one, is the one responsible for organizing the security plan, and they should then be reporting directly to senior management and have a path to enforce security outside the normal structure. And then there's varieties of plans. There's strategic plans that go on for several years, your tactical plan that go for some shorter time like 1 year, and then individual operational plans for projects you might have, like rolling out a new bunch of laptop computers or something, short-term operations. So your strategic plan is long-term, and your tactical plan are the little projects that take about a year, and your operational plan are the really short ones, little things that happen. So all these things are happening at different levels in the management. And you have change control and change management. So if anybody wants to change something on the network, like update software, add new hardware to the wireless network, things like that, you don't just do it. You have to get permission from the Change Control Board because, mature companies notice that people that make changes often create problems, especially security problems. So you try to make sure that the changes are justified and that they are not going to harm the organization. And whenever you make a change of any significance, you have to include a rollback plan, because it is quite common that you plan to make a change like updating the version of an operating system on a server, and it turns out that the new version causes problems you can't solve right away, and you have to roll back to the old version and restore business back to the way it was while you work out those problems. And you must have a change control board if you want to meet the higher level Orange Book specifications. I don't think we talked about the Orange Book yet, but it's coming up a lot in later chapters. It's a military document specifying levels of computer security. And the high levels are B and A, and you cannot get up to the B or A levels unless you have a change control board. So it's a list of various practices you must have in order to meet certain military security levels. So the change control process, you implement the change, you have a testing process to make sure it works, you allow enough time to roll it back. So usually what you do is you wait for something like the weekend, and then you perform the update and you say, well, it will take us 6 hours to roll back, so we're going to have a decision made at like 8 hours before the workday starts, and we'll either keep this because it's working, or we have enough time to roll it back and make sure that when people show up from Monday to work, they have something working, even if it's just the same old thing. You inform the users, you analyze it, and it's reviewed and approved by the Change Approval Board. Now, you have to classify your data so you know how secure it is. You've got data that is public information, unimportant information, and then you have some other data that is more and more important until you have data that is extremely secret. Your top secret design products you have created. Now, they wouldn't call it top secret outside the military, but you call it confidential or proprietary. So you figure out how much it would hurt you if that data leaked out and other things, and then you can decide who's allowed to reach it, what restrictions are on that, how you're going to maintain its security, how you're going to monitor the access, and how you're going to store it, and then how you're going to dispose of it when you're done storing it. All these things depend on the classification of the data. So you identify a custodian, have evaluation criteria. Now you have to label each resource, every tape, every printout, every storage volume of whatever you have. And then your personnel all have to know how it works. So they know that the secret stuff has to go in the special secret trash bin that's going to be shredded, but the unclassified stuff can just go in the normal trash, that sort of thing. So in the military, you got unclassified, confidential, secret, and top secret. In business, you typically have public, sensitive, and confidential. So the senior manager is responsible for the security of the organization. If the security professionals work underneath the senior manager and they follow the directives from senior management, and then the data owner is responsible for classifying information. And beneath the data owner is the data custodian who actually does the work in response to the data owner. And then there's users down here using the stuff. And one important thing is if you are in management, you are responsible for what happens beneath you. So if you're the senior manager and somebody like the custodian does something wrong, like inappropriately dispose of data and leak it, you could fire that person, but you cannot escape the fact that as the manager, you are responsible for that data breach. It is your fault that you hired somebody incompetent, you didn't train them, you didn't review their work properly. That's the problem with being management. You are responsible for what the people underneath you do. You can't just point to them and say, they did a bad thing, it's not my fault. The truth is, they did a bad thing, and it is your fault. Your job is to hire good people, train them, and oversee them, and review their work, and make sure they're doing good work. Anyway, all right, and there's an auditor, of course, who is outside this structure. The auditor is an employee of your company, although sometimes they're outside auditors, but they are not part of this chain of command. They come in to inspect it, to make sure that all the right forms are being filled out, all the right procedures are being followed, and produce a report, an audit report, which is used to evaluate the state of your security and ways to improve it. And, of course, also for compliance with various regulations. So, let's take a look at a Kahoot. There is 1C here. All right. People still coming in. Okay. That's what I thought. PragerU is from Dennis Prager, and I heard about him because he decided to deliberately catch COVID and went out of his way to catch it because he thought the natural immunity was the best thing to have. So a few months ago, he deliberately caught COVID. I knew I'd heard of him, and not in a good way. All right, let's see how this works. All right, so questions. Which one of these is useful for a year? That's a tactical plan. Strategic is long range, tactical is comparatively short range. The operational is even shorter. All right, who's responsible for the security of an organization? The manager, and the manager above them up to ultimately the CSO, and then of course the CEO that's ultimately responsible for everything. All right. So who makes backups of systems? The custodian does work like that. All right. All right. Who makes compliance reports? All right, that's the auditor. Good. All right. That's a real name, and that looks like a real name. Good. I think those are all real names, so we'll be able to tell who you are and give you your points. All right. So, all right. So we'll talk about some control frameworks. There are a lot of them. These are just ways to organize your security processes. There are just many different ways to look at it. They all do essentially the same thing. They just organize what's going on at your company. Let me just arrange this to be less annoying. All right, so the ISO 27000 series is an international framework. It is very burdensome and complex and lengthy. Costs about $1 million and takes years to implement. But once you've done it, you are then eligible to serve large, powerful organizations like military organizations that want to see this. There are many, many parts of it. Information security risk management, digital evidence analysis, practice for electronic discovery, and just many, many things. A big, thick book worth of documents explaining how you should do this and how you should do that, and you have to do all this and prove that you're doing all this to achieve 27,000 compliance. The Zachman framework is another way to just organize all the security activities, so you have these questions: what, where, when, why, who, and how, and then you have those questions with perspectives: executive, business, management, architect, technician, and so on. It's not particularly focused on security, but it is a way to just list all the things you ought to be doing in your company and all the aspects you might want to pay attention to. There's another one called TOGAF, another enterprise architecture framework, again, not particularly pointed toward security, but technology, applications, data, and business domains. Just another way to try to list all the pieces of a company you should be thinking about and make sure that you really have planned for the things that need to be done. The Department of Defense has one called DODAF, and so it's got all viewpoint, capability, data information, operation, projects, services, standards, and systems. And you can see all these things do the same thing. They just try to enumerate all the parts of your business and somehow make it easy to make a sort of checklist to make sure that you have considered the requirements for all these different parts of your business. Here's the British Ministry of Defense Architecture Framework, which is a lot like the other one we just saw. And there's the Sherwood Applied Business Security Architecture that has assets, motivation, process, people, location, and time, and then all these architecture sections. So you've got logical architecture for your assets, will be an inventory of information assets, and so on. Physical architecture, just refers to all the things you'd think about. These things are sort of deadening when you first see them. Some of my students that have graduated and got jobs at companies say these things are really important. And companies really do hire people to dig through these frameworks and make sure that you're complying with all of it. COBIT is one from ISACA, a organization for security that puts out the CISSP certification, among others. And they've got 5 principles: meeting the needs of the stakeholders. The stakeholders are everybody affected by your decisions, from the customers to the employees to the business partners and everybody else. Covering the enterprise end-to-end with a single integrated framework, which is called a holistic approach, and separating governance from management, which I'm not sure I really quite understand the difference. I think management is telling people what to do and governance is making sure they did it. I think that's roughly what the difference is. So here's your principles in 7 enablers: principles, processes, structures, culture, information, services, and people. You see, they're all just sort of taking the same pie and cutting it up along different axes. And here's the National Institute of Standards. That's part of the U.S. government. So they have this special publication 800 series. This is what most American businesses I know are working with. And they describe the federal government policies. So you've got principles here in IT, cybersecurity, role-based training, and for developing plans and just many, many pieces. I come across this one all the time, the NICE framework. This is what organizes all the things you could put in cybersecurity classes. So I develop an awful lot of classes for many clients, and they all want classes to align to the NICE framework, which is very big and complicated. But this is the official U.S. government standard of how to teach people cybersecurity, and everybody's trying to organize their program to match this platform. So one thing that's kind of amazing is that the Department of Defense, now they've defined what you should do for security. They audit themselves, and they always fail. They fail appallingly. More than 90% of systems are not up to compliance because they were able to decide what you should do, but they don't have the money and resources to really put in all the equipment to bring it up. So it's a big problem. And so you saw all those different standards, all doing approximately the same thing. This is what tends to happen. Here's the obligatory XKCD about it. If there's 14 competing standards, somebody will say, well, you just need to make a universal standard to replace all of them, and the end result is now you have 15. You have this new one you created, and all the old ones will, of course, continue to exist. It's just because there's a new one that somebody thinks is better doesn't mean that a whole bunch of people aren't going to keep using the old one. And that's what happens. You just have many, many standards in use that all do more or less the same thing. HITRUST CSF is a company that works with healthcare primarily, and they have the Common Security Framework. So that's another structure. And this one has 14 control categories, from security policies and compliance to physical security, business continuity, and so on. Again, the basic security stuff that you got to do, cut into a group of pieces that they find convenient to organize their plans. And have critical security controls, things like inventorying your assets, vulnerability management, which means you run some kind of scanner to detect if you have vulnerability. Here, governance versus management. Governance is the responsibility of the board of directors. Management is the business of planning, building. Yeah, that's what I thought. So management is doing things, and governance is checking to make sure it was done properly. Yeah. All right. Thank you. I appreciate the help. And so here's some of these control secure configurations for your software and hardware. Audit logs, protecting email, blocking malware, and so on. These are all the sort of best practices you'll see in any of these systems. And you got boundary defense, wireless control, incident response and management, and penetration tests. All the good stuff is part of this framework. Then you got COSO, or Treadway Commission. These again have 5 components: control risk assessment, control activities, information, and monitoring. And COBIT is the IT framework derived from COSO, which was for corporate governance. And then Octave. I hear about this one quite a lot from Carnegie Mellon, an American university that's a real leader in cybersecurity. And they have various versions of this. Octave looks like this. You establish risk management criteria, then you make an information asset profile, then you identify threats, and then you identify risks and mitigate them. So it's just a procedure to go through limiting risk. And then there's ITIL from the Office of Management and Budget, another part of the U.S. government. And they have 5 publications here. And notice this one you'll see is implied in all of them: continual service improvement. Everything is supposed to be a feedback loop. You specify your goal, then you implement policies and controls to achieve your goal. Then you have assessment where you measure, have our efforts been successful? To what extent have we eliminated malware or whatever we're trying to accomplish? And then you feed that back and to the top and improve your processes. And you have to be constantly improving to keep up with the changes in your business and the changes in the attackers and such. So ITIL does have a security component, and it has an audit of security controls every 3 years. And here's a whole bunch of publications covering all the sort of things you'd see, like change management we were talking about before, incident management and event management, and continual service improvement, and many other aspects of security. Here's another one, Six Sigma, where you have a loop. So you define what you want to accomplish, you measure it, then you analyze it, then you improve it, then you issue more controls, and then you define what you want again, and you go around this loop. All right, that's the Six Sigma. They have an algorithm, a mnemonic here, GMADV, if you can remember that. And then there's the capability maturity model integration. This is an issue, we talk a lot about the maturity level of a security program. A company with no security program at all has a low security level, and therefore they typically do not even notice when they've been hacked, and they don't know what to do about it when they do get hacked. And as you become more mature, you begin to have more monitoring and more ability to notice when you've been hacked, and a better and better incident response team to deal with it, until a very mature company is very quick to notice problems and very quick to resolve them. But that's a big accomplishment, and it takes years to build your way up to there. So you got these maturity levels. Initial is just where your company works. Then managed is where you have some authority, making sure things are done correctly. Then you have defined, where you've got defined levels and hierarchies, and then quantitatively managed. And the best is what I said before, optimizing, where you have a closed loop, where you measure how well you're doing, and you take the results of measurement to improve your plan continuously. So here's another one called CRAM, for Risk Analysis and Management, from the UK. And so you value your assets, you find the threats and vulnerabilities, and then you identify and prioritize countermeasures. And here's another XKCD. It's again explaining security problems. A lot of them are. Airplane safety is really very good. Elevator safety is very good. But voting, all experts say do not use computer voting or internet voting at all. And to outsiders, it's not clear why. You can send money over the internet, and that's safe enough, but why not voting? And the problem is that we don't know how to secure it. Even though we have all these experts and models and everything, we haven't found any way to secure voting against the real threats that would come in, like adversary nation states trying to mess with the votes. So there are companies claiming they have secure voting products, but they're all pretty much fraudulent and lying. And so there's a top-down approach where upper management says we're going to be more secure. How can we secure banking but not voting? This is a very interesting question, and I asked a voting expert about this. The point is, banking, you put in money and you get a receipt. And sales, you pay something and you get a product. But voting is a special problem where you make a vote, but it's anonymous. You can't really audit the results. It's private. You don't really have a receipt that proves much. So that's the problem. Voting is a very special situation. And the other problem is you have extremely powerful adversaries that are willing to do expensive things to mess with the voting. So all the experts have said the best way to vote is on a piece of paper with a pen, because then you just have that pile of papers and you can count them again when you decide to have a recount. Anonymity and the fact that it's not a two-way exchange. I vote and I don't walk out of there with a receipt or a product that really records what it should. So I don't have anything I can really use. And so the best thing is just have a pile of paper that is a hard copy record. Yeah, I know, exactly the same issue struck me, but they've been quite strict about this, saying that computer voting, and by the way, a lot of people would like to have internet voting. If we had internet voting and you could just vote on your cell phone, then there wouldn't be this issue of drop boxes and all that jazz, but there would be other kinds of fraud. So, yep, no chads, yeah. Anyway, so a top-down approach is where upper management decides we're going to do something about security and they then push out the policy. This is the recommended approach, and the CISSP training makes a lot of deal about this. You shouldn't attempt to make a security change without the buy-in of upper management, because it's expensive, and if management is not supporting it and pushing it, it will never get done. Bottom up is what you often have. IT staff decides to make security decisions without input from senior management, and this is usually just a disaster. If management is not on board with your program, it will never work. You will not really get the resources, you won't really have management making people comply, and you'll just frustrate yourself. Anyway, all right, let's take a look at another Kahoot. 1D. Yes. I'll give it a few more seconds. See if we get up to 14. Ah, thought so. Ah, all right. Ah, people still coming in. Okay. Music doesn't seem to keep going anymore. There appears to be a... Anyway. All right. Let's just carry on. All right. So which framework comes from the International Organization for Standardization? That's it. The ISO stands for International Organization for Standardization, I think in some non-English language. But anyway, that's it. ISO 27000. All right, which one comes from ISACA? COBIT. Sorry, it's all just alphabet soup. Like I say, a lot of the CISSP is memorizing a bunch of these terms. Which framework is used by the U.S. federal government? NIST, National Institute of Standards. All right. And which one is mainly used by healthcare? CSF. All right, good. It's a two-time winner. That's a new one. And that might not be a real name. And that is Judy. I think I've seen that before. All right. Good. Good. Time to do another one. All right, good. Good. So, your security program has a life cycle. You plan what you're going to do, then you implement it, then you operate and maintain it, and then you monitor and evaluate to see how well it's working. And that's the loop. Like I say, this is the life cycle, so you plan, make a plan, you implement it, you operate and maintain it, and then you evaluate it to see how well it works, and then you improve your plan and go around and around and around for an optimizing security environment. And then there's compliance, which I've mentioned. If you decide to meet one of these standards, or you are perhaps legally obligated to meet one of these standards in your business, then you have to prove that you are obeying these. Like if you take credit card payments, you must comply with PCIDSS. If you handle health data, you got to comply with HIPAA, and there's a bunch of others. So depending on what industry you're in, you figure out which standards apply to you, and then you have to prove that you are in fact obeying all the requirements of that standard. All right, so you got governance, which you got strategic planning, and then compliance, making sure you're obeying the laws and regulations and standards, and then you have risk, and you now make decisions. You have some degree of risk tolerance, and you make risk trade-off decisions, and you have how these decisions are made, and you have to consider the impact of not complying. If you fail to comply, then you might have legal consequences and perhaps a breach. So laws vary. To apply the law it can be quite challenging, and there's privacy regulations, privacy requirements protecting personally identifiable information. In Europe, there's a relatively new standard that is much more rigorous about privacy called the GDPR, and California just passed one imitating it, and these are much more burdensome, have a lot of ways to protect privacy of people, which has been a very low bar in the United States. The United States has very little privacy protection, and businesses just do whatever they want with your data, including selling it to other people, and these begin to rein that in. So here's Facebook. In 2019, set aside $3 billion just for an FTC privacy fine, which I'm not sure if it came out. But isn't GDPR the reason we get privacy consent pop-ups? No, I don't think it is. I think you get those even only in America. But I think GDPR is part of it. A lot of people like GDPR. But now that you mention it, I don't quite remember exactly why we get all those pop-ups warning you that we're using cookies on this site. Maybe it's GDPR, but I think I see it even on sites that are just for America. I'm not quite sure. It's a good question. I think I knew it one time, but I don't remember. Could be GDPR. So anyway, you got legal regulatory issues. Your computer could be the target. If they want to affect your computer, it's more likely a tool, stealing secrets from a database, credit card numbers, and so on. And one fundamental problem is that it's difficult to prove who did things. Delete yourself from the internet. Yeah, I know this one. That's one thing about GDPR. It does give you the right to be forgotten and such. So that's a good little article, how to delete yourself there. All right. So civil law is when you can sue somebody for money. Common law is what's used here, which is emphasis on cases and precedents. And this is probably the one most often used in the CISSP exam. Then there's religious law in some places like Sharia, although not in America, and customary law related to, say, best practices, which sometimes comes up in deciding issues of gross negligence in America. And then there's criminal law, which is the law where police will hunt you down and throw you in prison, things like murder. And then there's civil law, which is the point here. Now, criminal law, you must prove beyond a reasonable doubt because people are going to go to jail. In civil law, you just have to have the preponderance of the evidence, which is more likely than not the so-called 51% rule. And this is where you sue somebody and all you get is financial damages. So those are the big categories of law. And here's damages. Statutory damages are money you have to pay just to punish you for having broken a rule, even if it didn't do any harm. Compensatory damage is compensating for the real harm you did somebody. And punitive damages are extra damages on top of these just to punish you to make sure that people will be deterred from doing this again. And so those are the three types of financial damages. Administrative law is what has to do with all these compliance rules. This is where instead of having a law that says you won't do this bad thing, and if you do, there will be a punishment of this many dollars and that many years in jail, they have a regulation that says you must obey these rules to do this business. That's an administrative regulatory law, like FCC regulations, how you can handle the radio frequencies and things like HIPAA. And now if you're in an industry in America doing that, you must comply with these regulations. And if you don't comply with the regulations, then they can punish you, as specified in regulation. Punishments for failing to comply with the administrative rules. There was a case I heard about that helped me understand this, where a guy wanted to sue because he wanted to grow organic corn, and there was genetically modified corn in his field that blew in from the field next door. And the farmer wanted to sue, and the lawyer said, well, you can't prove that that corn came from the field next door. He said, well, I have a pretty good idea. That's right, it was Roundup. And he said, yeah, but he can't go to court with a pretty good idea. You need to have evidence. And the same thing's true of like water pollution. If there's somebody pollutes the water and then you get cancer, you can't prove that that pollution caused your cancer. So the way to do it is administrative law. You pass a rule saying if you grow GM corn, you must leave like 100 feet between you and the next farm. And then you punish them for not doing that because you can measure that. And the same thing you do with like water pollution. You can't release more than this many parts per million of stuff, and if you release more, then we punish you. That's how you do it. You take something that can't be proven and you turn it into something that can be measured and have a regulation. So due care is the prudent man rule. You are just supposed to take reasonable precautions, not do foolish things like dumping toxic waste down the drain instead of properly disposing of it. Due diligence is the management of due care. Your managers checking and making sure that people are following good practices instead of doing obviously foolish things. Intellectual property, you got trademarks, which limit who can use this term for marketing. You got patents, so nobody else can make this product for a period of time. And you have copyrights. If you created something, you were the first person to create it, and you can prove that, then nobody else can make a copy of it without your permission for a period of time. although they can do certain amounts of things with fair use for things like a review or a satire. There are licenses. The most common one we see is the end user license agreement that you have to agree to install software. And then there are trade secrets, protected by non-disclosure agreements, and outside California by non-compete agreements, that their employees know this thing which your competitors would like to know, and it is illegal for that information to be given to them without your permission. So there's software piracy, an attack against intellectual property, copyright infringement, corporate espionage, which is a huge issue, stealing proprietary secrets from companies. And one way to do it is with typo squatting. You buy domains that are close to the real domain, and then some people will make that mistake when they put it in an email client, so you will start getting email sent to that company. Can a company force signing an NDA after you exit? Well, I would think not after you exit, just logically. They don't have any leverage anymore. What they usually do is they make you sign an NDA in order to get the job. And then they say, well, if you won't sign it, you don't get the job. After you leave, I don't think they could unless they have some other kind of leverage out of them, like, if they're letting you if they can take away your pension for not signing it or something like that. But normally once you leave, they don't have any more leverage, I would think. All right, so that's digital rights management is the technological controls here. So you have some kind of mark on here. And this is all based on a Digital Millennium Copyright Act of 1998, which makes it illegal to make unauthorized copies of movies, music, or software. And there's restricted export of cryptographic technology, which turned into a big mess. For a while, you couldn't send powerful computers out of the country to certain other countries because they thought they would use them to make encrypted traffic that we couldn't open. There are still regulations, and I found this out when I went to DEF CON China. I was teaching a workshop, and they wanted someone to teach another workshop, and I said, I'll teach cryptography, and they said, no, if you try to teach cryptography in China, you'll be in violation of U.S. export regulations, and I checked, and it's true. We are not allowed to teach cryptography in China, because the software piracy is very bad in China, and they punished them by putting them on the restricted list where you cannot teach them cryptography. And that was what I found here. Here's the list. So B is relaxed export rules, people that we're on good terms with. D is stricter control, and E is very strict. And China was, I think, on a D list, which means I can't teach. They could, but if you're still getting bonuses, then you haven't really left, But I mean, that's the leverage they would have, Moby. If there's something you still want from the company, then they can try to get you to sign something to get it. But if you've left, I would think they've lost their leverage. Yeah, and that's right. Getting a lawyer is a good move. Yeah. Right, so here you go. Relaxed countries are like Canada and Singapore. D is like China and Russia. And E must be, I don't know who, I guess North Korea or something. No, D is only North Korea. So it's hard to imagine who would be E. Oh, terrorist supporting countries. I see. All right, anyway. So a data breach is when the confidential data you collected is leaking out to unauthorized parties. Cybercrime is anything criminal. And law enforcement complains about the going dark problem as more and more evidence vanishes behind layers of encryption, and they can't get at it. That's why the law enforcement agencies are constantly trying to end strong encryption so they can see what's going on. So privacy is the confidentiality of personal information. Now, Europe has always had, even before GDPR, Europe has had much stronger privacy rules than America. And the problem is America has all these wonderful free services like Google and Yahoo, and they want to use them in Europe. But if they do, that data is being stored on American servers, which are not secure enough, especially for foreigners. Foreigners don't even have any privacy protection at all in America. So it's kind of illegal for European companies to use American services, and there has been an effort to create some legal framework for that. And there was a thing called the EUUS Safe Harbor, which was a special exception so that European companies could use American services.
Sorry,
and
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Something, somehow Siri turned on my watch. Anyway, so the USA lost this privilege because of the Snowden leaks, when Snowden leaked a bunch of information out, and they replaced it with something called Privacy Shield, which more or less did the same thing. It is kind of a legal fiction, where American companies pretend to protect European privacy over here, which I don't think they actually do. So, there's a Council of European Convention on Cybercrime, which promotes cooperation between law enforcement, so you can actually prosecute crime that crosses international boundaries. So here's some laws and regulations. HIPAA is a big one, having to do with how health insurance must be protected. Then there's CFAA, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which is what most hackers are prosecuted with, that was intended to protect government computers, but it was written saying any computer that was used in interstate commerce, so any computer on the internet that can be seen from more than one state counts. So the end result is you cannot exceed your authorization on such a computer. And this turns out to be extremely broad, so many relatively harmless security research activities appear to violate the CFAA. And when traveling, shut off your phone. Yep, I've heard a lot of these tips. Yeah, if people were trying to search your phone, that'd be an issue. Anyway, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act protected communications from warrantless wiretapping, and the Patriot Act, after 9/11, greatly increased the U.S. government's ability to spy on American citizens, which they've been doing vigorously ever since. Gramm-Leach-Bailey Act forced financial institutions to protect customers' financial information, and the Sarbanes-Oxley Act forced people to have honest financial disclosures, so you could determine whether it's wise to invest in such a company. PCIDSS is not a law. It is industry self-regulation. The major credit card companies like Visa and MasterCard got together and they wrote their own rules. And they have rules of how this stuff must be protected. And as anybody can tell you, it's not working very well. There's an incredible amount of credit card numbers being lost in breaches. So there's breach notification laws out there. No federal law yet, but a lot of state laws. And so when you do lose data, you have quite a legal job of notifying people that you've lost the data. And then there's professional ethics, part of a CISSP certification. There are 4 canons. You protect society, you act honorably and legally, you provide diligent and competent service, and you advance and protect the profession by teaching classes, contributing to a chapter of a club like ISACA or something. If somebody doesn't like what you're doing, they can submit a ethics complaint. I got one submitted against me by one of the lunatics on the internet. One of the troublemakers claimed that I had violated the ISC Code of Ethics. This was a class project to deal with this years ago when this happened, and claimed that I impersonated a security officer at the college because I asked to see what he had found before I would put him in contact with the people, because he was kind of a troll and I didn't think he was an honest player, which he largely wasn't. And I submitted a defense. You have 30 days to defend yourself, and the board met and said, fine, you're not going to be punished, you're not going to lose your certification. But just like a doctor's license or a lawyer's authorization from the board, you have to defend yourself against ethics complaints, and if you don't defend yourself, they can remove your certification. And by the way, anybody can send a complaint against you, even if they're not in any way related to you, if they're not a customer or anything. They don't have to have any connection to you to complain about your ethics, which is kind of annoying when trolls get in the act, which is what happened to me. Anyway, let's try another Kahoot, and then we'll take a break, since we're coming around to the hour. I did, in fact, get a lawyer. I have a lawyer that has helped me with several problems. You kind of need a lawyer in this business. Would you be eligible to reapply to be certified? Well, that's a good question. Hey, Jackson, I don't know the answer. If you were to lose your CISSP for an ethics complaint, I don't know. I would think you'd have to resolve that before you could be certified again, but that's a good question, and I don't know. I have a lawyer who's a friend, so I've consulted him many times on things like this. This business is making more sense lately, but when I got in it about 10 years ago, there was a lot of like crazy abuse and trolling going on. And you really needed a lawyer more. It's calming down now. There's a lot more maturity among cyber professionals now. 10 years ago, there were a bunch of crazy semi-black hat hackers in the business that were just sort of wild, drunk lunatics making trouble all the time. Now a lot of people actually have degrees and they wear a suit and they try to make sense and be polite and stuff. Yeah, it's becoming, respectable profession that people act in a really professional way. And 10 years ago, it was more of the Wild West, just a bunch of sort of lunatics. All right. Looks like we got everybody. All right. So what's the newish European law about privacy? That's GDPR. Well, of course, yes, Reality Winner and Martha Stewart certainly should have had attorneys. I hope neither of them tried to go through without them. I mean, they're facing prison time. If you're facing prison, you need an attorney. Anyway. All right. What are the laws police enforce? All right, criminal laws, I think everybody knows that from cop shows on TV. All right, what law protects movies and music? All right, that's DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And what law ensures financial disclosures? Sarbanes-Oxley. All right. All right. Fu will have to tell me who they are if they want their points. Escrow, I don't know who that is. All right. Well,